My name is Harriet, and I am 67 years old. I have lived in the same red brick house on the outskirts of Austin, Texas, for 40 years. My husband Frank and I raised our only son, Derek, here. And after Frank passed away 8 years ago, I stayed because every corner holds a memory I cannot bear to leave behind. I always believed that family was everything. I gave my son all the love I had supported him through every challenge and welcomed his wife Kristen into our lives with open arms. But last Mother's Day, everything changed. Kristen said something at the dinner table that made everyone laugh except me. That one sentence kept me awake for 3 nights straight. And on Monday morning, I made a decision that nobody saw coming. Before I tell you what happened, let me know in the comments where you are watching from today. If stories about family loyalty and standing up for yourself speak to your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Now let me take you back to how this all began. I need to tell you about my life so you can understand why that Mother's Day dinner hurt so deeply. Frank and I bought this house in 1984 when Derek was just 2 years old. It was a fixer-upper, a 2-story colonial with peeling paint and a leaky roof, but we saw potential where others saw problems. Frank was an electrician by trade, a man who could fix anything with his hands and make it look easy. I worked as a registered nurse at St. David's Medical Center for 35 years, taking double shifts when we needed extra money, coming home exhausted, but never too tired to read Derek a bedtime story. We poured everything into this house. Frank rewired the entire electrical system himself, spending weekends in the attic running new cables, while I handed him tools from below. We saved for 3 years to redo the kitchen, and when we finally installed those oak cabinets, we stood there holding hands like newlyweds, admiring what we had built together. The backyard has a massive oak tree that Frank planted when Derek turned 5. He hung a tire swing from its branches, and I can still hear Derek's laughter echoing across the yard on summer afternoons. The living room has the same brown leather sofa where our family gathered every Saturday night for movie marathons where Derek fell asleep countless times with his head in my lap. Frank passed away 8 years ago from a heart attack. It happened on a Tuesday morning. He was drinking coffee at the kitchen table, the same spot where he sat every day for 3 decades, and suddenly he clutched his chest and collapsed. I performed CPR until the paramedics arrived, using every skill I had learned in my nursing career, but it was too late. After the funeral, people asked me if I would sell the house and move somewhere smaller. I told them no. This house is not just walls and a roof. It is the story of my life written in every scratch on the hardwood floor, every paint chip on the windowsill, every creak of the 3rd stair that Frank always meant to fix, but never got around to. My son Derek was always my pride and joy. He was a bright child, curious about everything, the kind of kid who asked why the sky was blue and actually listened to the answer. He worked hard in school, earned a scholarship to the University of Texas, and graduated with honors with a degree in finance. Now he works at a prestigious financial firm downtown, wearing suits that cost more than Frank's monthly salary used to be. I remember driving him to his first job interview, how nervous he was, how I told him that no matter what happened, I would always be proud of him. When he got the job, we celebrated at his favorite barbecue place, just the 2 of us, and he thanked me for believing in him when he did not believe in himself. After Frank died, Derek and I grew even closer. He called me every week without fail, sometimes twice. He drove out to the house every other Sunday for dinner, helping me with yard work, fixing things around the house that I could not manage alone. We would sit on the back porch drinking sweet tea, watching the fireflies come out at dusk, talking about everything and nothing. Those were precious times. I thought they would last forever. Derek met Kristen 5 years ago at a company cocktail party. She worked in marketing for a tech startup, ambitious and polished in ways that intimidated me from the moment we met. She was 34 years old, beautiful in that sharp, calculated way that made you feel like she was always assessing your worth. Her blonde hair was always perfectly styled, her nails always manicured, her clothes always expensive. The first time Derek brought her to meet me, she walked through my house with her eyes scanning every surface, every piece of furniture, every family photograph. She smiled politely, but her smile never reached her eyes. I tried so hard to connect with her. I invited her to help me make Thanksgiving dinner, thinking we could bond over cooking the way my mother and I once did. She declined, saying she did not cook. I suggested we go shopping together, get manicures, have lunch at that little cafe downtown that I loved. She was always busy. I sent her birthday cards with heartfelt notes about how happy I was that Derek had found someone special. She sent brief thank you texts that felt like automated responses. But I kept trying because she was going to be my daughter-in-law, and I wanted us to be family. The wedding was 3 years ago at a fancy country club that Kristen's parents belonged to. It was elegant and expensive, the kind of affair featured in bridal magazines. Kristen's dress cost $15,000. The flowers alone were $8,000. The venue rental was another $20,000. When Derek came to me, nervously asking if I could help with some of the costs, I did not hesitate. I wrote a check for $20,000, nearly a fifth of my savings, because I wanted my son to have the wedding of his dreams. At the reception, Kristen's mother made a toast about how fortunate Derek was to be joining their family. She did not mention me once. There is something else I need to tell you, something that only Derek knows. About 2 years ago, Derek and Kristen bought a beautiful condo in a high-rise building downtown. It had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, modern finishes, all the luxuries that Kristen insisted upon. But they could not qualify for the mortgage on their own. Their debt-to-income ratio was too high because of Kristen's student loans and their expensive lifestyle. So Derek asked me for help. He asked me to co-sign the loan and put my name on the property as a co-owner. He said it was just a formality just to help them get approved, and he promised they would refinance within 2 years and remove my name. I agreed because he was my son, and I trusted him. But that was not all. Derek also asked if I could help with the monthly payments just temporarily until they got back on their feet. He said Kristen had taken a pay cut to switch to a more prestigious company, and things were tight. So for the past 2 years, I have been paying $1,200 every month toward their mortgage. Kristen does not know about this. Derek asked me to keep it secret because he said Kristen would be embarrassed. I have been quietly subsidizing their lifestyle while living modestly in my own home, cutting coupons, skipping my own small pleasures, all to help my son. And there is one more thing: my will. After Frank passed, I updated my estate documents with the help of a lawyer named Patricia, a woman I had known since my nursing days. In that will, I left everything to Derek: the house, which is now worth around $400,000, my savings account with $350,000 money that Frank and I scrimped and saved our entire lives to accumulate, a small investment portfolio worth another $100,000. Everything I owned would go to my only child, the son I had sacrificed so much for, the boy I had loved from the moment I first held him in my arms. I believed that all of this generosity, all of this sacrifice came from love, and I believed that love would be returned with respect, with gratitude, with basic human decency. I was wrong. The changes started small, so small that I almost did not notice them at first. After the wedding, Derek's weekly phone calls became bi-weekly, then monthly. When I called him, Kristen often answered, her voice polite but distant, always saying Derek was busy with work or in a meeting or taking a shower. She promised he would call back, but he rarely did. I told myself this was normal. Newlyweds need time to build their own life together. I did not want to be the overbearing mother who could not let go. Derek's 37th birthday was the first time I truly felt the distance. For 36 years, I had hosted his birthday dinner at my house. I would cook his favorite meal beef stew with homemade biscuits, a recipe passed down from my grandmother. I would bake a chocolate cake from scratch, decorating it myself, even though my frosting skills were never very good. Derek always said the lopsided frosting was part of the charm. It was our tradition, one of the few constants in a world that kept changing. That year, I called Derek 3 weeks in advance to plan the dinner. Kristen answered. She said they already had plans for his birthday. They were going to a new steakhouse downtown with some of their friends. I suggested we could do a separate celebration another day, maybe the weekend before or after. Kristen said she would check the calendar and get back to me. She never did. On Derek's actual birthday, I sat alone at my dining table with a pot of beef stew growing cold, a chocolate cake with his name written in blue frosting sitting untouched on the counter. I blew out the candles myself and made a wish that things would get better. 2 weeks later, Derek called to apologize. His voice sounded strange, rehearsed somehow like he was reading from a script that someone else had written. He said Kristen had planned the dinner months ago and he could not disappoint her. He said he was sorry I was hurt, but that I needed to understand that Kristen was his wife now and her feelings had to come first. I wanted to ask him when my feelings stopped mattering at all, but I swallowed those words because I did not want to push him away. Thanksgiving that year was another blow. For 4 decades, Thanksgiving had been celebrated at my house. Even after Frank died, Derek came home every year without fail. We would watch the parade together in the morning, then spend the afternoon cooking while football played on the television in the background. It was chaotic and messy and perfect. But that year, Kristen announced that they would be spending Thanksgiving with her parents in Dallas. She said it was only fair since they had spent the previous Thanksgiving with me, which was not actually true because they had only stopped by for 2 hours before leaving for a friend's party. I offered to host them all, Kristen's parents included, at my house. Kristen said her mother preferred to cook in her own kitchen. I ate Thanksgiving dinner alone that year. I made a small turkey breast, just enough for one person, with stuffing from a box and cranberry sauce from a can. I set the table with my good china anyway, the set that my mother had given me as a wedding gift, because it felt wrong to eat such an important meal on everyday dishes. The silence was deafening. I kept the television on just to hear human voices. That night, after I washed the dishes and put away the leftovers, I sat in Frank's old armchair and cried for the first time since his funeral. One afternoon in early spring, my neighbor Marge came over for tea. Marge is 72 years old, a retired school teacher with silver hair and sharp eyes that miss nothing. She and I have been friends for 30 years, ever since she moved in next door with her husband Harold, who passed away just a year after Frank. We are both widows now, both living alone, both trying to find meaning in the quiet years of our lives. Marge has 3 children and 7 grandchildren who visit her, constantly filling her house with noise and laughter. I used to envy her for that. Marge noticed that something was wrong with me. She said I looked tired, that I had lost weight, that the spark in my eyes had dimmed. I told her about Derek, about Kristen, about the birthday dinner and Thanksgiving and all the small slights that had accumulated like snow on a rooftop. Marge listened without interrupting, sipping her Earl Grey tea and nodding occasionally. When I finished, she set down her cup and looked at me with a directness that only old friends can manage. She said she had noticed the changes too. She had seen Derek's visits become less frequent, had watched me waiting by the window on Sunday afternoons for a car that never came. She said she had held her tongue because it was not her place to interfere, but she had been worried about me for a long time. She told me that I needed to talk to Derek directly without Kristen present and find out what was really going on. I promised her I would try. I gathered my courage and called Derek. I asked him to meet me for dinner, just the 2 of us, at a quiet Italian restaurant we used to go to when he was in college. He hesitated, said he would have to check with Kristen, then called back an hour later to say he could meet me on Thursday evening. I spent the whole day nervous, rehearsing what I wanted to say, trying to find the right words that would bring my son back to me. At the restaurant, Derek looked uncomfortable from the moment he sat down. He kept glancing at his phone, checking the time as if he had somewhere more important to be. I asked him how he was doing. He said, fine. I asked about work. He gave a brief, generic answer. Finally, I gathered my courage and asked the question that had been burning inside me for months. I asked if everything was okay between him and Kristen, if he was happy, if something was wrong that he was not telling me. His reaction was not what I expected. He became defensive, almost angry. He said I was overstepping, that his marriage was none of my business, that Kristen was a wonderful wife, and I should be grateful that he had found someone who loved him. I tried to explain that I was not attacking Kristen, that I was just worried about him because he seemed so distant lately. He cut me off. He said that Kristen was his wife now and I needed to accept that things had changed. He said maybe I was having trouble letting go. Maybe I needed to find my own life instead of trying to live through his. Those words hit me like a slap across the face. I sat there in stunned silence, my untouched pasta growing cold on my plate. Derek paid the check and said he had to get home. He kissed my cheek mechanically the way you might kiss a distant aunt at a funeral and left me sitting alone in that restaurant booth. I stayed there for another hour drinking coffee I did not want, trying to understand what had happened to my son. A month later, something happened that shook me to my core. I went to the bank to check on my savings account, a routine visit I made every few months just to make sure everything was in order. The young teller was new, friendly, and chatty, and she mentioned in passing that my son had been in recently asking about estate procedures. She said he had questions about power of attorney and how asset transfers worked. She assumed I knew about the visit. I did not. I drove home in a daze. Derek had been asking about my assets, my estate, without telling me. Why would he do that? What was he planning? I tried to think of innocent explanations, but none of them made sense. If he had questions about inheritance, why would he not just ask me directly, unless he was trying to find out something without me knowing, unless someone was pushing him to investigate what he might stand to gain when I was gone? That night, I could not sleep. I lay in the darkness staring at the ceiling, feeling like a stranger in my own life. Christmas arrived with all its forced cheer and hollow promises. I decorated the house the way I always did, stringing lights along the porch railing, putting up the artificial tree that Frank and I had bought together 20 years ago, hanging the ornaments that Derek had made in elementary school. There was the lopsided clay star he crafted in 2nd grade, the popsicle stick reindeer from 3rd grade, the glitter-covered snowflake that still shed sparkles on the carpet every year. Each ornament held a memory, a piece of a past that felt increasingly distant from my present. I bought gifts for Derek and Kristen, spending hours choosing things I thought they would like. For Derek, a beautiful leather briefcase to replace the worn one he had been carrying since his first job. For Kristen, an elegant cashmere scarf in the shade of blue she often wore. I wrapped them carefully with silver paper and red ribbons, wrote heartfelt notes expressing my love and hopes for the new year. I invited them to Christmas dinner, telling them I would make all of Derek's favorite dishes, that we could continue the traditions we had built over so many years. They arrived 2 hours late. Kristen walked in without apologizing, immediately checking her phone and announcing that they could only stay for 45 minutes because they had a company Christmas party to attend. Derek followed behind her, like a shadow not meeting my eyes. I had spent the entire day cooking. The ham was glazed to perfection, the mashed potatoes whipped smooth with real butter, the green bean casserole crispy on top just the way Derek liked it. None of it mattered. They ate quickly, barely tasting the food, making small talk that felt like a performance for an audience that was not there. When they left the presents still sitting unopened under the tree, Kristen gave me an air kiss that landed somewhere near my left ear. Derek mumbled something about calling me later, which we both knew he would not do. I stood at the window watching their car pull away, the taillights disappearing down the dark street, and felt something inside me crack. It was a small crack hairline, thin, but it was there. And once something cracks, it is only a matter of time before it breaks completely. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with my coffee growing cold, looking around at the house that suddenly felt too large, too empty, too full of ghosts. I thought about all the Christmases past, all the birthdays, all the ordinary days that had been made extraordinary by the presence of family. I thought about Frank, about how different things might be if he were still here. He would never have let Derek drift so far away. He would have demanded respect, set boundaries, spoken uncomfortable truths that I was too afraid to voice. But Frank was gone, and I was alone, and I did not know what to do anymore. In January, Marge invited me to join her book club, a group of 8 women who met every other Thursday at the public library to discuss novels and, more honestly, to gossip about their lives. I went reluctantly at first, feeling like an intruder in their established circle. But they welcomed me warmly, refilling my coffee cup and asking my opinions and making me feel like I belonged. For the first time in months, I laughed genuinely. One of the women, Dorothy, told a story about her son-in-law that had the whole room in stitches. It felt good to be around people who enjoyed my company, who noticed when I was there and missed me when I was not. I began to see my situation more clearly through the eyes of these women. Several of them had experienced similar struggles with their adult children. Eleanor, a retired accountant with impeccable posture, told me about how her daughter had married a man who systematically isolated her from the family, how Eleanor had not seen her grandchildren in 3 years. Barbara, whose jewelry always jangled when she moved, shared her own story of a son who only called when he needed money. These women understood what I was going through in ways that I had not expected. They did not judge me for still hoping things would improve, but they also did not let me make excuses for behavior that was clearly disrespectful. One evening in February, I received a phone call that confirmed my worst fears. It was from Patricia, the lawyer who had helped me with my will. She said that Derek had contacted her office asking about the terms of my estate. He had questions about when assets would transfer, whether the will could be contested, what would happen if I became incapacitated. Patricia told him that such matters were confidential and she could only discuss them with me directly. She was calling to let me know to ask if I had authorized Derek to inquire on my behalf. I had not. I hung up the phone and sat in the darkness for a long time. My own son was investigating my estate, without my knowledge, possibly planning for a future in which I was either dead or declared incompetent. I thought about the nursing home comment that Kristen had made at dinner one night, supposedly joking about how I was getting too old to live alone. I thought about Derek's questions at the bank. I thought about how systematically I had been pushed out of their lives, reduced from mother to obligation, to apparently just another asset to be managed and liquidated. The crack inside me widened. Mother's Day arrived on a warm Sunday in May. I decided to host dinner at my house despite everything telling myself that this could be a turning point, a chance to reconnect as a family. I spent the entire day preparing. The roast chicken was seasoned with rosemary from my garden. The mashed potatoes were made with real butter and heavy cream. The green beans were sautéed with garlic exactly the way Frank used to make them. I baked an apple pie from scratch, rolling the crust 3 times until it was perfect. I set the dining table with my best china, the Wedgwood pattern that my mother had given me, laid out linen napkins, lit candles, arranged fresh peonies in a crystal vase. I invited Derek, Kristen, and Kristen's parents. I thought having more people would create a buffer would keep the conversation light and pleasant. I cleaned the house until it gleamed even the corners that nobody would notice. I put on a nice dress, one of the few I owned, and applied makeup for the first time in weeks. I wanted everything to be perfect. I wanted to prove that I was still capable, still valuable, still worthy of being part of this family. The guests arrived at 6 in the evening. Kristen's father, Richard Thompson, was a tall man with silver hair and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. He owned a commercial real estate company that had made him wealthy. Kristen's mother, Patricia Thompson, was a former model whose beauty had hardened into something intimidating with age. They walked through my house with their eyes assessing everything, pausing at my furniture with barely concealed disdain, handling my mother's china as if it might be contaminated. Kristen was wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Her hair was professionally styled, her makeup flawless, her jewelry expensive and understated in that way that only truly wealthy people achieve. Derek walked behind her in a suit that looked new, though I could not remember the last time my son had dressed so formally for a family dinner. He nodded at me stiffly when he entered, accepting my hug without returning it, immediately moving to get drinks for Kristen and her parents. We sat down to dinner, and the conversation was polite but distant. Richard talked about a golf tournament he had won at his country club. Patricia mentioned a charity gala she was organizing. Kristen discussed her latest marketing campaign with the enthusiasm of someone who expected everyone to be fascinated by her accomplishments. Derek said almost nothing, just nodded along to whatever his wife said, laughed. When she laughed, agreed when she made pronouncements. He was like a ghost of the son I had raised, hollow and obedient and unrecognizable. Midway through the meal, Patricia Thompson began talking about her mother. She said they had recently moved her into Shady Oaks, a luxury nursing facility in Dallas. She described it like a resort, praising the gourmet meals and the spa services and the attentive staff. She said it was the best decision they had ever made because her mother was getting the professional care she needed, and the family no longer had to worry about her falling or forgetting to take her medication. She made it sound like shipping your elderly mother off to live among strangers was a kindness, a gift even. Kristen nodded enthusiastically throughout her mother's speech. She said Shady Oaks had a waiting list 2 years long and they were lucky to get a spot. She said her grandmother seemed happier there than she had been living alone in her old house, surrounded by memories and responsibilities she could no longer handle. She talked about the freedom the family had gained, no more emergency phone calls, no more weekend visits out of obligation, no more worrying about a fragile old woman rattling around in a house too big for her needs. I felt a knot forming in my stomach as I listened. The conversation seemed to be heading somewhere specific, building toward a point that I did not want to reach. I tried to change the subject, asking about Derek's work, but Kristen redirected the conversation back to elder care. She said it was important to plan for these things in advance, before a crisis forced difficult decisions. She said too many families waited until it was too late, until the elderly parent had become a burden that no one could carry. The word burden hung in the air like smoke. Then Kristen turned to look directly at me. She lifted her wine glass and smiled, but her smile was cold, calculated the smile of someone about to strike. She said, "Speaking of Mother's Day gifts, I have been thinking about what would be best for you, Harriet." She paused dramatically, making sure she had everyone's attention. Then she said, "I think the best gift for you would be a spot at Shady Oaks. You are living alone in this big old house, struggling to maintain it, getting older every day. Would it not be better to have professionals taking care of you?" Everyone at the table laughed. Richard Thompson's booming laugh, Patricia Thompson's delicate titter. Even Derek, my own son, chuckled nervously, not meeting my eyes. They all laughed as if Kristen had made a clever joke, as if suggesting I should be packed off to a nursing home was the height of wit. As if my home, my independence, my entire life could be dismissed with a punchline. I sat frozen, my fork suspended halfway to my mouth, unable to speak or move. The laughter washed over me like ice water. I looked at Derek, willing him to say something to defend me, to acknowledge that this was cruel and inappropriate. But Derek just stared at his plate, his jaw tight, his shoulders hunched, saying nothing. His silence was worse than Kristen's words. His silence told me that he had known this was coming, that he had probably discussed it with her beforehand, that he had chosen her over me so completely that he could not even muster a weak protest. Kristen continued talking, emboldened by the laughter. She said my house could probably sell for a good price given the neighborhood's appreciation. She said the proceeds could pay for years of quality care at a nursing facility, with plenty left over. She said Derek would not have to worry about maintaining an old property or dealing with the hassles of being responsible for an aging parent. She spoke about my life, my home, my future, as if they were line items on a spreadsheet to be optimized and liquidated. I excused myself and walked to the kitchen. I stood at the sink, gripping the counter so hard my knuckles turned white, trying to breathe through the pain spreading through my chest. I could hear them continuing to talk in the dining room, their voices muffled but audible, probably discussing more details of my disposal. I cried silently, tears streaming down my face and dripping into the sink, my shoulders shaking with sobs I could not release. In that moment, standing alone in my kitchen on Mother's Day, I understood that I had lost my son. Not to death like I had lost Frank, but to something that felt almost worse. I had lost him to indifference. That night, after everyone had left, after I had mechanically cleared the table and washed the dishes and put away the leftovers that no one had bothered to take, I sat alone in my living room staring at nothing. The house was silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock that Frank had inherited from his father. Each tick felt like an accusation. Tick, you trusted them. Tick, you gave everything. Tick, they laughed at you. Tick, tick, tick. I did not sleep that first night. I sat in Frank's armchair, the leather worn smooth by decades of use, and replayed the dinner in my mind. I heard Kristen's voice saying, "nursing home," over and over, saw the smug satisfaction on her face, felt the absence of my son's defense like a phantom limb. I thought about all the sacrifices I had made, the double shifts at the hospital, the vacations we never took so we could save for Derek's education, the $20,000 for the wedding, the mortgage payments I was still making on their condo, the will that left everything to a son who apparently saw me as nothing more than an obstacle between him and his inheritance. Around 3 a.m, I started questioning myself. Maybe I was being oversensitive. Maybe it really was just a joke, and I was taking it too seriously. Maybe I was the problem, too attached, too needy, unable to accept that my son had grown up and built his own life. I had seen this pattern before in my nursing career, elderly patients whose families visited less and less, who made excuses for their children's absence, who blamed themselves for being too demanding. I had always felt sorry for those patients. I never imagined I would become one of them. By sunrise, I had convinced myself that I was overreacting. I decided to forgive and forget, to give Derek and Kristen another chance. But then I remembered Derek's silence. He had not defended me. He had not even looked uncomfortable. He had laughed along with everyone else as if the idea of sending his mother to a nursing home was perfectly reasonable, even desirable. That memory hardened something inside me. The second night was worse. I could not stay still. I paced through the house, walking from room to room, touching the walls and furniture, as if to remind myself that this was real, that this was mine. I stopped at the bookshelf in the hallway where I kept my photo albums. I pulled one down and sat on the floor, flipping through pages of memories. Derek as a baby, his toothless grin captured in faded color. Derek on his first day of kindergarten, clutching my hand, afraid to go. Derek at his high school graduation, tall and proud, hugging me while Frank took photographs. Derek at his wedding, looking at Kristen with an adoration that now felt like betrayal. I spoke to Frank that night. I sat in front of his photograph on the mantle, the one from our 25th anniversary, and talked to him as if he could hear me. I told him what had happened. I told him how lost I felt. I asked him what he would do if he were still here. The house was silent, of course. Frank could not answer. But in that silence, I remembered something he had said to me once years ago when I was worried about a conflict with a colleague at the hospital. He said, "Harriet, being kind does not mean letting people walk all over you. There is a difference between generosity and being a doormat." He said, "Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is set a boundary." I had forgotten that advice for years. I had told myself that unconditional love meant unconditional tolerance. I had confused being a good mother with being a silent victim. But sitting there in the darkness of my living room talking to my dead husband's photograph, I finally understood what Frank had been trying to tell me. Love without respect is not love. It is exploitation, and I had been exploited long enough. On the third night, I did not cry. I did not pace. I did not question myself. Instead, I went to my filing cabinet and pulled out every important document I owned: my will, the deed to my house, the co-ownership papers for Derek and Kristen's condo, bank statements showing the monthly transfers I had been making toward their mortgage, investment account summaries, insurance policies. I spread them all out on the dining table and looked at them with clear eyes for the first time. I saw the shape of my generosity laid bare in black and white. $350,000 in savings, a house worth $400,000, another $100,000 in investments, $23,000 paid toward their mortgage over the past 2 years, $20,000 for the wedding, countless smaller amounts over the years, all of it going to a son who could not be bothered to defend me when his wife suggested I be discarded like obsolete furniture. All of it ultimately benefiting a woman who saw me as nothing more than a resource to be harvested. By morning, I had made my decision. I was done being generous to people who did not respect me. I was done sacrificing for a family that saw sacrifice as weakness. I was done being the doormat that Frank had warned me about all those years ago. I picked up the phone and called Patricia, my lawyer. I told her I needed to see her first thing Monday morning. I told her I was making some changes. She asked if everything was all right. I said no, but it was about to be. Monday morning arrived with the kind of clarity that comes after a storm. The sky was brilliant blue, the air crisp, the birds singing in the oak tree outside my window, as if the world had not just fundamentally shifted on its axis. I put on a professional outfit, a navy blue blazer and gray slacks that I had not worn since my retirement party at the hospital. I wanted to look serious. I wanted to feel powerful. I had spent 67 years being soft, being accommodating, being everyone else's support system. Today, I was going to be something different. Patricia's office was in a small building downtown, sandwiched between a dental practice and an accounting firm. The waiting room smelled like leather and coffee, and her assistant offered me a cup that I declined because my hands were already shaking slightly, and I did not trust myself not to spill. When Patricia came out to greet me, she looked concerned. She had known me for 15 years, had seen me through Frank's death and the aftermath, and she could tell that something significant had happened. We sat in her office and I told her everything. The dinner, the nursing home comment, the laughter, Derek's silence, his secret inquiries about my estate, the 2 years of mortgage payments that had drained my savings, the co-ownership arrangement that put my name on an asset I had no intention of ever using. Patricia listened without interrupting her face, carefully, neutral, occasionally jotting notes on a legal pad. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and asked me what I wanted to do. I told her I wanted to change my will. I wanted to remove Derek as my sole beneficiary. I wanted to divide my estate among causes that actually valued what I had to offer. I wanted a portion to go to the retirement fund for nurses at St. David's, the women who worked the same grueling shifts I had worked for 35 years. I wanted another portion to go to the hospital's patient assistance program, helping families who could not afford care. I wanted a small amount set aside for Marge, my faithful friend, who had never once made me feel like a burden. And I wanted nothing, absolutely nothing, to go to Derek or Kristen. Patricia nodded and began typing on her computer. She said she would draft a new will immediately and have it ready for me to sign before I left. She explained the process the witnesses required the steps to ensure it would hold up in court if contested. I asked her if Derek could challenge it. She said he could try, but since I was clearly of sound mind and had legitimate reasons for my decision, he would be unlikely to succeed. She asked if I was certain. I told her I had never been more certain of anything in my life. While Patricia worked on the will, I made a phone call to my bank. I spoke with a manager I had worked with before, a patient woman named Sandra, who understood complicated situations. I explained that I needed to cancel the automatic monthly transfer to Derek's mortgage company. She confirmed the cancellation would take effect immediately. I asked her about the process for removing myself as co-owner from the condo property. She said I would need to work with a real estate attorney, but that it was certainly possible. She gave me the name of someone who could help. By noon, I had signed my new will. Patricia had arranged for 2 of her staff members to serve as witnesses. I wrote my name on the signature line with a steady hand, feeling the weight of the moment. This was not revenge. This was not anger. This was simply me, finally, after 67 years, choosing myself, choosing to direct my resources toward people and causes that deserved them, choosing to stop subsidizing a lifestyle that excluded me, choosing to stop funding my own dismissal. 2 weeks later, Derek called me in a panic. His voice was high and strained, the voice of a man who had just received very bad news. He said the bank had notified him that the mortgage payment had not been made. He said there was some kind of administrative error and he needed me to call and fix it. I told him it was not an error. I told him I had canceled the automatic transfer intentionally. He was silent for a long moment. Then he asked why. I told him why. I told him about Mother's Day, about the nursing home comment about his silence, while his wife humiliated me in my own home. I told him I had learned about his visits to the bank and to Patricia's office asking questions about my estate. I told him I had spent 2 years quietly paying for a condo, that I would never step foot in supporting a lifestyle that did not include me. I told him I was done. He started to protest, to make excuses, but I interrupted him. I said, "You made your choice, Derek. You chose Kristen over me. Now I am making my choice. I am choosing myself." That evening, Derek and Kristen showed up at my door unannounced. Kristen was furious. Her careful composure cracked her face, twisted with anger. She demanded to know what I thought I was doing. She said I was being selfish, petty, vindictive. She said I was punishing Derek for having a life of his own. She said I was mentally unwell and maybe I really did belong in a nursing home. Derek stood behind her, pale and quiet, letting his wife do the talking as he always did. I invited them to sit down. I spoke calmly, without raising my voice, without tears. I explained exactly what I had done and why. I told them about the new will, though I did not specify who would receive my estate. I told them about the canceled mortgage payments. I told them I was beginning the process of removing myself from their condo's ownership papers. I told them these decisions were final and not open for negotiation. Kristen sputtered with outrage, but I held up my hand and stopped her. I said, "Kristen, you made a joke about sending me to a nursing home." Everyone laughed, but I was not laughing. I was realizing that to you, I am not a person. I am a resource. And Derek, you sat there and said nothing. You let your wife disrespect your mother on Mother's Day in her own home. You have been planning for my death or incapacity for months, investigating my assets behind my back. I have given you everything a mother can give, and this is how you repay me. So now I am giving my everything to people who actually value it. After Derek and Kristen left that night, after the door slammed and the sound of their car faded down the street, I sat alone in my living room and waited to feel something. Regret, maybe. Fear. Doubt. But what I felt instead was relief. It was like I had been carrying a boulder on my back for years without realizing it, and suddenly the weight was gone. My shoulders literally felt lighter. I could breathe more deeply. The house, which had seemed so empty and sad just a week ago now, felt peaceful. It felt like mine again. The weeks that followed were hard in some ways, and healing in others. Derek did not call. I did not expect him to. Marge came over nearly every day, bringing casseroles I did not need, and company I desperately did. She told me I had done the right thing. She said she had watched me disappear over the past few years, watched the light go out of my eyes, watched me shrink myself smaller and smaller to accommodate people who did not deserve accommodation. She said the Harriet she had known 30 years ago would have set these boundaries much sooner. I started doing things I had neglected. I joined the book club, officially attending every meeting, even volunteering to host when it was my turn. I signed up for a yoga class at the community center, something I had always wanted to try but had never made time for. I began volunteering at the hospital again, sitting with elderly patients who had no visitors reading to them, holding their hands, being the presence I wished someone would be for me. These patients reminded me what dignity looked like, what respect sounded like, what human connection felt like when it was genuine. In June, I started writing in a journal. Patricia, the lawyer, had suggested it, saying it might help me process everything that had happened. At first, the pages were full of pain, of anger, of questions I could not answer. But gradually, the tone shifted. I wrote about Frank, about the good years, about the lessons his death had taught me about the preciousness of time. I wrote about Derek as a child, about the sweet boy he had been before Kristen, and I grieved for that boy without pretending he still existed. I wrote about the future, about the things I wanted to do with whatever years I had left, and for the first time in a long time, those pages held hope instead of dread. One Saturday in late summer, Marge and I took a road trip to the Texas Hill Country. We visited wineries and antique shops and a lavender farm that smelled like heaven. We stayed overnight at a bed and breakfast with creaky floors and quilts on the beds and a breakfast spread that would have made Frank weep with joy. On the drive home, Marge turned to me and said I looked different, younger somehow, more alive. I told her I felt different. I told her that losing Derek had been painful, but losing myself had been worse, and at least now I had found my way back to who I was. In October, 6 months after Mother's Day, my phone rang. It was Derek. His voice sounded different, younger somehow, more like the boy I remembered. He asked if we could meet, just talk. He said he and Kristen had separated. He said he had been doing a lot of thinking and he owed me an apology. He asked if there was any chance I might hear him out. I said I would meet him, but I made no promises beyond that. We met at a coffee shop downtown, Neutral Territory. Derek looked exhausted, older than his 38 years, like a man who had been carrying his own boulder. He told me about the separation, about how Kristen had become even more controlling after the money from my estate was no longer a certainty. He said he finally saw her, clearly saw how she had manipulated him, isolated him from his family, encouraged his worst instincts. He said he was sorry. He said he had been a terrible son. He said he understood if I could never forgive him. I listened without interrupting, just as Marge had listened to me all those months ago. When he finished, I told him the truth. I told him that my door was open, that I still loved him, that a mother's love does not simply evaporate because of mistakes. But I also told him that trust once broken takes time to rebuild. I told him he would need to show me through actions, not words, that he had truly changed. I told him we could try to have a relationship again, but it would be different from before. It would be a relationship between two adults who respected each other's boundaries. He nodded. He cried a little. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand, and I let him. The journey is still ongoing. Derek visits me once a month now. We are careful with each other, polite, slowly rebuilding something that might never look like what we had before, but might become something else, something more honest. I have not changed my will back. Maybe someday I will include him again in a limited way, or maybe I will leave things as they are. That decision does not need to be made today. What I know for certain is this. I am 67 years old. I have lived through loss and betrayal and the particular pain of being dismissed by someone you raised from infancy. But I have also discovered something important. I discovered that choosing yourself is not selfish. It is necessary. I discovered that boundaries are not walls. They are foundations. I discovered that it is possible to love someone and still refuse to be treated poorly by them. If you are watching this and you recognize yourself in my story, if you are giving and receiving nothing but disrespect in return, I want you to know that you deserve better. You deserve to be treated with dignity. You deserve relationships that honor your worth. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is cancel something. Cancel the automatic generosity to people who do not appreciate it. Cancel the silence when you should speak. Cancel the belief that your value depends on how much you give away. Let me ask you something before I go. Have you ever had to set a difficult boundary with someone you love? Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your self-respect? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. Please share this video with someone who might need to hear it today. Hit that subscribe button if you want more stories about families' resilience and finding strength in unexpected places. And give this video a like if Harriet's journey touched your heart. Thank you for spending this time with me. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being part of this community where we can share our truths without judgment. I wish you peace in your relationships, courage in your boundaries, and the wisdom to know that you are worthy of love that respects you completely. Until next time, take care of yourself. Because at the end of the day, you are the only person who truly can.